As humans, we think in terms of stories. Our very understanding of the world is in terms of stories that we already understand. We tell stories to describe ourselves, not only so that we can understand others, but so that we also may understand ourselves. These stories will reach across generations and cultures. So, let me tell you a story of how the cinema became one of America's favorite pastimes. So grab that popcorn, put up those feet, and let's go head into the cinema. Now, I'll be your host, Elisa, as we dive into Chapter 10's Cinema's Technologies. Let's take the story of ancient man, for instance. What do we know about humans before all these modern technologies? We know stories about them because of the ancient artifacts that they've left behind. Storytelling formed the core of civilized life and was as important to pre-literate humans as it is to us living in the information age today. Today, we live in a century of mass storytelling. Think about the people of today's culture who crave entertainment and excitement. Theater has become an institution of mass storytelling. How did this shift take place? To understand that, we will need to dive into a brief history of the cinema's past. The early years of the cinema were a time for innovation and exploration. Today, much like the technologies we see, an idea has a foundation that is built upon by many, until finally the product has become perfected. In 1878, Edward Muybridge set up a battery of cameras triggered by a horse moving through a set of tripwires, adapting a zoetrope for projecting photographs. Muybridge arranged the photograph plates around the perimeter of the disc, and it was manually rotated. If it was rotated rapidly enough, a phenomenon known as persistence of vision allowed the viewer to experience a smooth and realistic view. In 1882, French physiologist and specialist in animal locomotion invented the chronophotographic gun in order to take a series of photographs of birds in flight. Shaped like a rifle, the camera took 12 instantaneous photographs of movement per second. It imprinted them on a rotating glass plate coated with a light-sensitive emulsion. A year later, he switched from the glass plates to a paper roll of film. In America, Thomas Edison's company first demonstrated moving images in 1894 through a mechanical peephole device called the kinescope. The first movies were short travelogues, documentaries, and trick films shown at traveling tent shows and other types of theaters. In 1894, the Lumiere brothers began working on their own apparatus, the cinematograph. This machine differed from Edison's machine by combining both photography and projection into one device at a much lower film rate of 16 frames per second. It was much lighter and portable as well. Since films were silent during this period, filmmakers had to learn how to emphasize key narrative points. Often this left actors needing to use exaggerated gestures. I'm sure you're familiar with our next big innovator, Kodak. After 131 years in business as one of the largest producers of film stock in the world, it filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in 2012. This company was hit hard by the recession and also the advancement in new technologies in cameras and digital film. In the digital world of bits and bytes, Kodak must just become one more 20th century giant to falter in the face of advancing technologies. Perhaps it was inevitable. The digitalization of the cinema began in the 1980s in the realm of special visual effects. In 1932, the introduction of Technicolor hit the cinema. It was a 3-particle color dye transfer process that slowly revolutionized the movie-making experience. It dominated film mostly up until the 1950s. It involved collaborations with Walt Disney. Although it was aesthetically beautiful, it was extremely expensive and required 3 times the film. In 1976, Star Wars revolutionized the industry. America International Pictures released Future World, which featured its very first use of 3D CGI, a computer-generated face and hand. At the same time, George Lucas's visual effects company, Industrial Light and Magic, took a big step forward with CGI, with the rendering of a 3D wireframe view of the Death Star trench depicted in the training aid for the rebel pilots of Star Wars. THX, that chest-bumping audio that's recognizable anywhere. At the time of THX's initial development in the early 80s, most of the cinemas in the US had not even been updated since World War II. Projected images looked shoddy, and the sound was crackly and flat. All that work and money that Hollywood poured into making these movies look and sound amazing was lost in these dilapidated theaters. Also in the 80s, Dolby Digital 5.1 was introduced into the cinematic audio. It was an audio configuration documented by various film industry groups as best satisfying the requirements for the theatrical film presentation. Now, I want to take you back to 1995, when you got your first glimpse of that realistic Disney film to be released, Toy Story. It was the first successfully animated feature film by Pixar. It was also the first all CGI animated film. Pixar has been largely successful in taking over the animation industry with their witty characters and bright and lifelike animation. Today, we get to still enjoy the wonders of these toys coming to life, as Pixar continues to further the storyline of these wonderful toys. Can we even mention CGI without mentioning the one and only Lord of the Rings trilogy? A combination of motion capture performances and keyframe techniques brought to life the main digital character of Gollum. By using this motion capture suit and recording the movements of Andy Serkis, no one will ever be able to forget my precious. Now, we will jump into the age of 3D film. James Cameron's Avatar in 2009 ushered in a new era for CGI. These new technologies that this film brought changed the way that we view movies today. The new technologies included CGI performance capture techniques for facial expressions and fusion camera systems for 3D shooting. The stimuli cameras were blending real-time shoots with CGI characters and environments. One of the greatest obstacles, however, for CGI has been effectively capturing facial expressions. In order to overcome this hurdle, Cameron built a technology he dreamt up in 1995. A tiny camera was mounted onto the front of a helmet, and it was able to track every single facial movement, from the darting eyes, the twitching nose, the furrowing eyebrows, and the tricky interactions of the jaw, lips, teeth, and tongue. And might I add, it was the highest grossing film in the world, coming in at nearly $3 billion. Now that we've taken a brief walk through the history of cinema, we need to ask the next big question: what's next? No one can be for sure, but some speculate that the advancements within broadband will change the way that we view cinema in the future. Now, for a pop quiz. In 1882, French physiologists and specialists in animal locomotion invented what instrument? Tick-tock. Can you think of it? All right. Did you guess the chronographic gun? If so, you got it right. Now, let's try one more. What was the new technology that was introduced in 1932? It revolutionized the movie-making industry, but nearly only until 1950. What was that technology? Alec, for 100, I'd like to guess, what is Technicolor? That's right, in 1932, Technicolor introduced a practical three-color dye transfer process that slowly revolutionized the movie-making industry. Well, that wraps up our story. Thanks for taking this walk through the cinema with me. Here's our credits. Give credit where credit's due. See you again. Bye. Wait a minute. We can't end a film about film without a Porky Pig goodbye.